So the one thing that the lovely introduction didn't include is Andy got married to me. I attended the Past Life Regression Academy. He first took my money and then he married me. So he's a very shrewd gentleman.
She did ask for a refund, by the way.
He's still paying for it, so that's okay. But I thought we would start the talk with how this particular book, Between Lives, came about. And it came about with a very personal story, and it's my personal story. It was the 27th of March, 2020. This is a date that's really important to me because it was at that point, Dad was still alive, but it was my late father's birthday. It was the launch of my second book, and I was in bed. I was in bed initially because I thought that I had burnout. But 3 days later, I felt a strong metallic iron band around the top of my lungs and the bottom of my lungs, and it was squeezing my lungs. And it was really, really difficult for me to breathe. And this is when I realized that I actually had COVID. And I got COVID at the early onset. Very little was known about COVID at this time. Can everyone hear me? At the back? Yeah, okay. So very little was known about COVID at that particular point in time. And the only thing that was coming out of the media was COVID equals to death. If you went to the hospital, you'd be isolated, you'd be you can't see your loved ones, you would be in a room without sunlight, fluorescent lights, and you might be intubated, and it was something that I didn't want. So what I did was I spoke to Andy at that time and I said, listen, Andy, is it okay if I stay here no matter what happens? Is it okay if I stayed in the house? It was just Andy, the dogs, and myself. And Andy was very gracious and really kind, and he actually said yes, he would take care of me. And so he was basically there for me, like my 24/7 carer. What happened then was the next day I actually had a shower, and because of the condensation I couldn't breathe. And this was the time when I thought I was going to die, and I had a bit of a panic attack. But still, we decided that no matter what happens, I'm going to stay at home in the house with my husband. No matter what happened, I just wanted to be at home. And then it was the 10th of April, and this date is branded in my head, and it was 10 o'clock when Andy took the dogs, said goodnight to me, and went upstairs to bed. I leaned over to turn the switch off, and as I was turning the switch off, and my eyes were beginning to shut, there was a part of me that said, if your eyes closed now, they would never open again. And, well, at that time, my eyes were shut, but that's when I knew that I was actually going to die. And at that point, there was a calmness that fell over me. It was as though my ego part, or the part that was hanging on to life, had just surrendered, and another part, a consciousness, a different type of consciousness, took over. And I was in a place of such calmness, but there was a little part up here that was curious about what was happening to me. And then what happened was there were 5 what I would call light beings. They look like Bunsen burner flames, so I'm going to call them light beings, at the foot of my bed. And we did a quick chat about my current life, and there was a lot of healing. And most of my wounding came from childhood, so there was a lot of conversation about that and some healing. And then suddenly I felt like I was pulled as though I was caught in an ocean riptide. And this feeling was so palpable. I was like, like I knew what was happening, but I couldn't control it. And as I was getting pulled, it was everything that I thought was really important at that point in time, like the promotion of my books at that point, bills, clients, whatever, things like that. it just dropped away, and I felt this incredible expansion of consciousness. That's the only way I can describe it. And the amount of peace and freedom I felt from this is something that it will never leave me. I've never felt it before in my life, and it was just an incredible feeling. And then we stopped at one point. I mean, there's more details about my near-death experience in this book, but we stopped at one point, and the being said, you know, as I was going, I said to the beings, I said, oh, what, you know, it's not time yet for me. I need to do work. I got book promotions to do. And they said, no. They said, no, it's your time now. So continue on with us. And I said, I was okay with that. And that pull this way was so tempting, because that feeling of peace and freedom was so much more palpable. It was so much more tangible. But then there was one thing that stopped me, and that was Andy. I didn't want Andy to come down the next morning and see my lifeless body in the bed. I couldn't bear it. You know, I just couldn't bear it. I didn't want him to go through any form of guilt, any form of blame. I didn't want him to do any of that. So I said to the beings, just give me 10 minutes. I need to write Andy a note. I have a notebook at the side of my bed. I need to write Andy a note. The being said, no, you either come now or go back. And so it was a really tough decision, but I chose to go back. And at that point, I blacked out. And then suddenly I opened my eyes. I was in bed. I turned the light on. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I nearly died. For me, it was my one near-death experience. I hope it'll be my last one. And but it had an enormous impact on me, on my system. It's something that you hear other people have, but it's not something that I thought would happen to me. And so, then of course, the next morning, Andy came down, and he goes, hi, darling, how was your night? And then I told him what had happened, and then we were both in a little bit of a state of shock after that. So it took me about 3 months to basically come to the realization that I actually had a near-death experience. I spoke to a really good friend of mine in America, and you know, we decided, that's what a near-death experience is. And then there were two thoughts that came to mind. The first thought was, a lot of what I went through in my near-death experience, the different stages, the light beings coming, the chat about my current life, the moving on, were very similar. These stages were very similar to a process called Between Lives Spiritual Regression, or Life Between Lives. Life Between Lives is a process, Andy will go into it in a lot more detail, but it's something that a gentleman in America called Dr. Michael Newton found this process. And then I actually spoke to Andy about this similarity. I used to teach the Between Lives in the academy, and I thought maybe I saw this experience based on my brain filters that were so used to the Between Lives process. So Andy and I thought, is this experience unique to me? Or do most people who go through the near-death experiences experience the same stages? So that's how the research came about, because we tried to look for books, or I did anyway, and we didn't find anyone who had compared the near-death experience and the Between Lives or Life Between Lives processes. And the second thing that we talked about was, do we really need to get to the precipice of life or the precipice of death to experience an expansion of consciousness? Does it really need to be that extreme? So that's where the second part of the book came along, about how we can expand our consciousness and find that moment of peace and freedom as best we can whilst in the body.
We do have a little bit more.
About 3/4.
Just picking up on the near-death experience that Reena experienced of experiencing things that was out of the body, and it comes all the way back to a basic assumption. A lot of physicists believe that the beginning of everything was a Big Bang, and the question is, when the Big Bang happened, was the consciousness there before there was a Big Bang of matter, or did consciousness happen afterwards? Now, the traditional medical view is consciousness is something in the head, through the brain activity in the brain. And their view is that there was no consciousness and the physical went through its Big Bang, and then at some point in evolution, humans developed, and then at some point in the evolution of humans, consciousness developed. And that's an assumption, but the assumption with that is that right at the very beginning, there was no consciousness. But if you take the alternative view that consciousness has always been there, and that we're all part of this collective consciousness, then a lot of these experiences seem to make much more sense. So we set about as detectives to start to pull together information that would support consciousness being outside the body and beyond just what's happening within the brain. And one of the areas we looked at was terminal lucidity. This is a condition that's reported by medical doctors and has been written up in peer-reviewed documents by medical doctors, where people who would otherwise be considered as a vegetable state, such as very severe cases of Alzheimer's, or when there's been perhaps brain cancer and the body has just been physically kept alive mechanically, just before they die, their eyes open, they have a rational conversation, close their eyes, and then they die. And how could that possibly happen if the brain was totally destroyed? Because that doesn't really fit within the facts, and it's quite common, terminal lucidity. It's not like a rare occurrence. Near-death experience is another example of consciousness being out of the body. This is times when people who have been by the bedside of someone who is dying, they've closed their eyes, and as the person passes away, they continue on the journey with them. They're able to experience aspects of that journey and come back with information that they couldn't possibly have known that they encountered on that journey. And some of the research has found in hospices, for example, up to 20% of people have these a shared experience at death. And the reason there isn't more reporting about it is that it doesn't fit within the framework of medical science. And anything that doesn't fit within the framework is just conveniently pushed to one side. And again, this is something that's been written up by the medical world. I mean, one of my first experiences that started me on the spiritual path is through mediumship. I went to see a medium, and the medium said to me, "I'm getting this message from your spirit guide that you didn't like rugby when you were young, did you?" I said, "What?" No one knew about this, but when I was younger, I used to always get picked for the first team for playing rugby, and of course in winter when all the ground is frozen, it's freezing conditions, and rugby is quite a physical sport. I kept wishing, please don't pick me, please don't, and yet I was always being picked, and I never told anyone. No one knew at all, and I hadn't thought about it. So how could this medium come out with this piece of information about my consciousness that I didn't know. And of course, I know some of you in the audience here come from a mediumship background, and you're doing lots of wonderful work to help people realize that consciousness is beyond the physical brain. A lot of our work, Reena and myself, is with past lives. And people spontaneously go into past life experiences. I remember the very first time it happened, I'd had 4 years training as a psychotherapist, and I'd said during my training, what do you do if someone asks for a past life? And they said, well, just treat it as a metaphor. So that was the level of training back in the late 90s. And this lady came in and said, I keep having these thoughts about Venice. I might have had a past life there. Can you do a past life regression for me? So I thought, well, okay, I'm not too sure how to do it. I'll use my hypnosis skills, take her to a deep level of trance. I was very careful just to ask questions such as, describe what's happening, what's communicated to you. And this story emerged of her being a keeper of prostitutes in Venice. And in those days, the keeper of prostitutes was the lowest of the low. And when she came out of trance, she said, how could you possibly take me into something like that? She said, I'm not happy at all. And of course, how could she have made up something that she was unhappy about? It's like the story emerged quite spontaneously. And one of the wonderful things with past lives is that people feel the emotions and the physical sensations to some level or other in there. There's a lovely gentleman called Ian Lawton who's written a number of spiritual books about the afterlife. And for his very first book, he came to me and said, Andy, I've had a past life regression, but I don't think the past life was real. I think it was my imagination kicking in. Could you take me into a past life so that I know it's real? I thought, oh, well, okay, I'll make the intent to go into a past life for you to know that it's going to be real. And it turned out he went into a past life where he was being tortured. He was on the rack. His fingernails were being pulled out. Now, normally therapists go through those events reasonably quickly because it's more the therapeutic value. But as Ian wanted to know that it's real, I did dwell a little bit longer as his fingernails were being pulled out. And when he came out, he said, there's absolutely no way, he said, I could have made that up. And he was then convinced that past lives were real. But you know, a lot of our work has been taking this further, and this is going into the memories between one past life and the next. And this is called Life Between Life Regression that Reena mentioned to you all before. And this requires very deep hypnosis to keep the conscious mind completely out and less involved in the process, so that the soul memories of what happens between one life and the next come through. And I'll talk about a little bit about a story of a client who came to me for Between Life Regression, just to illustrate some of the things that happened there. She was from Canada. Her husband had died 6 months earlier, and she was finding it very hard coping with life. And she thought that coming through with one of these regressions may help her understand a little bit more about why these events happened, because she'd been deeply in love with her husband, and it was a very big traumatic shock when he'd passed away. And she went into a past life of being a woman. Her husband had gone off to the war and never returned, and she gave up on life. And we picked it up at the point where she died, and this was the story she was telling of how she met her spirit guide. And the spirit guide kind of had its arms folded, because in the spirit arms, spirit can show themselves in any form. It's just energy follows form. And said, this is the third time it's happened, isn't it? Meaning that there'd been a sequence of lives where she'd given up on lives through a loss of a loved one. And then the spirit guide went through and started to review the past life, and was stopping at some point after the death of the husband and saying, look, there was an opportunity of a new person coming into their life there, and you passed it by. Do you realise that? And it wasn't to make a judgment, it was just to enable her to understand that there were opportunities where she could have made different decisions and had a different outcome in the life. And then the husband from the past life came in, and together with him, they went off with a spirit guide to start planning the next life, which is the current life that she was in. And as a soul, she wanted to work through this. It's almost like if you don't work through an issue in one life, the soul wants to repeat it. It's almost like being at school and failing in an exam and wanted to go through and try again until you get the past result. And they looked at various combinations, perhaps changing her sex, different ages, but in the end they decided she would be a woman again. Her husband, which would the soul that she was with from the past life, would be her husband again. He would die at a youngest age. He wanted to learn about patience so that there would be business opportunities come his way, and her job was to slow him down so that he wouldn't rush into them, so that he could go through his life lesson. And then she would have a lot more independence. She would have her own business, so it would be a lot easier for her to start a new life when he passed away. And the insight from this was enough for her to suddenly understand and realize, and it motivated her to change her life in a meaningful way. And she went off into a new relationship eventually, and had worked through this difficult life lesson for her. And the loss of a loved one is a really big lesson for anybody to work through, and it's something all of us at some stage go through, you know, whether it's a love of a pet or the love of a family member or a very close person to us, or even a relationship where people separate out. It's something that feeling the emotions is one thing, but to hold on to them and for it to impact life is like a form of suicide, and that was what she was working through. So these aspects, particularly the early stages of a between life regression, the aspects of leaving the body, being aware that you're dead, and she was able to look down and see the body as she was leaving it, of having a past life review, of reviewing some of the things that had happened, of meeting spirit guides, are all the early stages of a between life session. So the idea that Reena had following a near-death experience was because people are going back, they're not going through the whole of the experiences between lives. We couldn't compare the whole of our life between life, but we could compare the early stages with a near-death experience, just to see how similar they are. So we took 500 clients that had had past life regressions within the academy, where it was recorded by the graduates, and we have a questionnaire they fill in, which has all the major stages and what happens. And we compared that with 400 near-death experiences from the main medical pioneers. There was Pim van Novel, who is a medical doctor from Holland, did a very large study of 260 of his patients who had near-death experience. Of those, the ones that had near-death experiences, about 130, And he had a very detailed questionnaire for them, and he went back over 10 years later to see what the impact was and whether they still remembered the information. So he had a very detailed questionnaire that he was using. An American called Bruce Grayson, who's been a pioneer in this area, started off as an atheist, and he was having patients coming to him with near-death experiences, and eventually he accepted it, created questionnaires, and published articles in numerous magazines and written books on the subject. And in the UK, the neuroscientist and medical doctor, Dr. Peter Fenwick, who worked with 300 near-death experiences from the UK and parts of Europe. So we compared these, and we found a total consistency of all the major events between them, which seems to suggest that two completely different ways, one of them which was a spontaneous near-death experience, and the other which is going into deep hypnosis after a past life and then experiencing the early stages of a near-death experience, were very similar. And that seemed to us to be an amazing way of multi-discipline approach to establish that consciousness is surviving death. I mean, if you put that together with the terminal lucidity, the near-death experiences, mediumship, there's growing evidence that consciousness is outside the body. And probably we've had our own times where we may be walking down the street and suddenly have that feeling someone's looking at us, and we turn around and someone is. Or maybe we go into a room and there's been an argument, but the argument is finished, but you sense something in the room, you're sensing the consciousness of these other people in the room, and you just know that there's something not quite right. This is something that happens all the time, and what we really wanted to do was to, first of all, establish that consciousness is beyond something that happens in the brain. It's something that's around us, a little bit like a TV set. A TV set takes information and converts it and puts it on a screen. But you can't say all the channels are in the TV. The TV just is the receiving part for it. And if one TV doesn't work, you can get another TV and receive the signals. And in the same way, consciousness, our own consciousness is around us, and while we have a physical body, we can tune into it like the TV does. And if we die and we come back into another body, and then again, we can tune in like the TV, which seems to be a better way of explaining the information and the facts that we've been gathering. But the really interesting part, and I'm going to pass over to Reena in a moment on that, isn't so much the experience, it's the impact these experiences have and how this is related to expanded consciousness. So I'll pass it over to Reena.
I think there's a bit more time. So I'm just going to zoom through this. So again, we're just going to bring it back to a very personal, my personal story. My life completely changed after my near-death experience. It was an enormous turning point. I'm not going to go through it in so much detail because if you look at, thank goodness, this month's Kindred Spirit, there is an article here about, the lessons I learned with the near-death experience. So it's here for anyone to be able to read it. But some of the things that came out for me was that our biggest assets are our energy and our time. These are the two things that we cannot get back. And, while we are so careful with how we spend our money, we tend to not be so careful with our energy and our time. And so that form of intentional living is something that I am totally aligned with at this time. My circle of friends have shrunk. Some of them are here. Thank you. but they've totally shrunk because, we just need to be in a similar vibration where there is a balance, a give and take of our energy and our time. And when I went, that process of being pulled by that ocean current, that current, nobody knew this was happening to me. And I thought to myself, this huge thing is happening to me. My life is ending. And not even Andy knew. So when I came back into my body, and obviously, it took me about 6 months to reflect on all this, I thought to myself, why am I spending so much of my time and energy appeasing people, pleasing people, trying to get them in my circle? Why am I doing this? There's just no point. Because nobody knew, and very, very few people would have cared or would have been impacted if I had actually passed away. So these are the people that I have actually embraced more in my life. And it's not about having quantity of life. It's about having quality of life. So it's not about having, a big number of friends. It doesn't matter. It's that quality, a small number of friends you can spend more time with. And also my late father passed away recently, 3 years ago. And he and I were very, very close. And it was, but I went through my near-death experience, thank goodness, before he went through his experience. And there came a point in time when I actually had to make the decision of whether he should continue on or move on. And because I had had such a lovely near-death experience, and my dad was at a medical stage where he would have lost his quality of life. He would have been trapped in a body that would be, just not doing too well, and his brain functions were not doing too well. I actually made that decision to let him go. And, I don't think, because it just feels like it was a freeing decision for him. And it was interesting because I saw a friend of mine who's a psychic immediately after when I came back. I'm from Malaysia, so I came back and I saw my friend in the UK who's a psychic, and I said, hey, do you know how he's doing? And she said, the first thing she said to me was, I didn't even tell her anything about this. The first thing she said to me was, he said, thank you. I was the only one to give him permission to go. And for me, that was, because he took such wonderful care of me in life. I'm glad that this was something I could do for him when he was transitioning out of life. So that quality of life, the quality of friends, you don't have to live, until you're 90 and ill, because for me, the experience of dying is not, I'm not frightened of it anymore. It's not a scary experience. It's actually a really beautiful transition of the consciousness. And you just leave your physical body behind and you just move on. The other thing that happened as well when I came back, I started to understand the subtle energies that we give out. And to just give a quick background about these subtle energies, quantum theories have come out and they have said that when you break particles and matter into the smallest, tiniest little particle, it's actually energy vibrating so quickly it looks like string. This is the simplest way I can explain this. And so basically everything about us is energy. If we use the metaphor of water, where all the molecules, all the particles are really packed in together, that's ice. That's like our physical body. Then you have the flowing water where the particles are not so packed in together, and you've got this beautiful flow and movement of the particles. To me, that is our mental and emotional energy. And then you've got gas, where all the particles are far apart. It's there, but it's really intangible. And that is our soul consciousness. And when when I felt that expansion, when I left my physical body, to me that was my soul consciousness had expanded. And what I felt when I came back, because that expansion was still there, is that I realized how much we actually exude this energy. Even within this room, as you're sitting next to each other, it's almost like ripples. One energy is flowing into another energy. And we feel this as people. We feel this. Sometimes we go into an office space and then we may suddenly like somebody. But you like them because it's an energetic resonance. Or you may suddenly go, oh, well, this person, maybe I'll just, not sit so close to them, or I'm going to distance myself from them. Again, it's an energetic resonance. So for me, it went a little bit further after my near-death experience. I was standing by the balcony in my bedroom, and I was looking outside, and my neighbor was mowing his lawn. And he comes up to me and goes, hey, what's happening? And I said to him, oh, our neighbor's having legal issues. And Andy looks at me and goes, well, how do you know that? I said, I don't know what to tell you. Grass is green, sky is blue. The guy's having legal issues. And then a week later, he went and he bumped into the neighbor, over the fence. And the neighbor started to tell him about his legal issues. And this happened a few times when I felt things and I knew things. And what I realized was because my the subtlest, most intangible form of energy was so expanded, it was reaching out and it was just picking out information from everything and everyone. Obviously, in time, I've learned to put that all back because it got a bit much. I just wanted to spend time with me and my quality people and quality time with myself. And so, I've packed that all in. I don't know what any one of you are thinking. Don't worry about that. But but that's when I knew that, we spend so much time in the gross, in the tangible, what we can see, what we can feel, what we can hear, what we can taste. We forget that we actually have a method to experience the more intangible energy. And this is where we can also get a lot of information. It's through our intuition, our instinct. We already know how to do it. We just suppress it. But after my near-death experience, all that sort of came out. And then Andy and I were thinking, this has changed my life dramatically. I think it might have impacted Andy's life, but, he can talk to that himself. And we were saying, do we really need to go through something as extreme to experience this, to expand our consciousness, to put the changes in place in our lives where we can actually feel that peace and freedom within our lives, as opposed to only feeling it when we die? And so that's when we came up with the second part of the book. But this is the time that is so important. The time is going to support this expansion of our consciousness within us whilst we're in the body. How many of us have heard about changing consciousness, moving into the new consciousness, the approaching of the golden age, 5D consciousness, all that? Now, this is actually supported by, as far as I know, and probably more, but I know there are 2 astrological systems that supports this. One is the Western astrology, where we are moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And as we move through the ages, there's always a big shift in consciousness. So for example, when they moved from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, Moses came into the picture and shifted, within a spiritual religious sense, moved the consciousness from multi-gods to one god. And then when we moved from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces, Jesus came along. And he shifted the consciousness more from a judgmental God to a loving God. And now we are moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. So there is an enormous shift again of consciousness and the way we think. But then the best part of this is you've got the Vedic astrology as well. The Vedic astrology is calculated in a very different way. But the Vedic astrologers have all agreed that we are now moving from the Kali Yuga, which is the Dark Ages, up. The Vedic astrologers can't agree whether we're going to the Satya Yuga, which is where the Golden Age, that term comes from, or if we're moving to the Treta Yuga, which is, one step up. But they agree that there's an ascension in consciousness. So if you put these two together, this time supports the fact that we can all shift our consciousness. But you can see out there that there is a massive change happening. How many of us have noticed an increased polarity within our systems, within our governments? And it's all over the world, I'm not just picking on one particular government. How many of us are seeing explosive expressions of emotions out there? So many of us are seeing that. How many of us are experiencing things like, or seeing breakdowns of systems, right? How many of us want...
I hope so.
Yeah. Or shaking undercurrent. How many of us feel the need to suddenly shift and move places, location where we live? How many of us, our friendships, maybe family systems are breaking down? It's because we are finding our new resonance. All our little energy strings are just vibrating differently now. And we're shifting and moving towards what is more in resonance. But what we also realized is in the near-death experience, I was totally removed from the drama of it all. And I could shift my consciousness. Well, I had that expansion of consciousness because I was out of the drama. And so what we're going to talk about now is, so in the book, we actually go into this in a lot more detail, but we also give a lot more tips and techniques about how we can embody that expansion of consciousness and move into the new consciousness with a lot more calm and a lot more ease. And the metaphor I would give is this, right? It's almost like we're in a valley, and within this valley of the old consciousness, it's quite foggy, and we need to move up the valley to the mountain where it's nice and crisp. And how we get there is, there can be a little roadmap. And Andy will now share 3 of the tips that we can give you, but there are more tips in the book for this.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to Reena's metaphor of going from the valley to the mountain top. Not only is the fog in the valley, but there's fog halfway up, and a lot of people who start to go up the hill kind of get to the fog and they can end up turning around and going back to where they came from, or going around in circles. To find a way through is quite tricky. It's not easy to do that. So how do you do that? Well, you need some sort of internal compass, because there won't be any road signs saying how you get there. And some of the 3 tips that we can give you, 3 top tips, is Reena was mentioning before how everything is energy, and our emotions are energy too. And these new vibrations that are coming in are amplifying the emotions that we have. So if we feel joy and love, it'll be an absolutely amazing experience. If we're feeling anger or sadness or depression, that's going to be amplified too. So in other words, the message is to work through emotions. Now, when things happen, it's quite normal for some level of emotion to come. Then you center yourself, let it go, and move on. But sometimes the emotions kind of take hold of us. A little bit like the story of the lady who couldn't get over the loss of her loved one. And the thing with unresolved emotions, it's a little bit like a phobia. It's a very, very simple example. If someone has a phobia for a spider, and they see a spider and they feel fear, you can't blame the spider. You have to accept personal responsibility. There's something you have to resolve yourself. Of going in to find out what the source of that was and to clear it. And then you work through the emotional lesson. And all of us will have emotional lessons. You can't get through life without some sort of emotional issue happening, whether it's in childhood or later adulthood. And there's lots of self-help work on the internet. We've given some techniques that can be used at home. There's lots of wonderful therapists out there that can help you. But it's up to you. If you're feeling emotions coming to the surface more so than before, it's because the universe is saying it's time to clear that old stuff and get it out of the way so you can raise your vibration and embrace this path that Reena was talking about. Because when you do, you'll be able to tune into your inner compass much easier, and that will help you on this journey through the fog. The second top tip is sometimes these emotions that you'll feel won't be your own, they'll be other people. And the worst emotions that are coming in on the social media, on mainstream media, whenever anybody can suggest, what do you think is the lowest vibration that comes in through all of the media that it's very easy for us to link in with?
Fear.
Fear, yeah, definitely.
Shame.
But there's shame.
Guilt.
Shame is the lowest, and then fear isn't far behind it. And a lot of these have been coming through. I remember a time when I was in corporate and I was invited to go caving, and the person who was inviting me said, well, to become a member of our club you have to go through something called a sump, which is deep underground. It's an area that's flooded. You have to hold your breath, go through underneath a big rock and pop out to the other side. And he kept saying, oh, what it's like and how cold the water is, and, you know, hope you get through the other side. And as I was walking down to this place where the sump is with my colleagues, I kept having this thought going through my mind, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I was carrying all of his fear. And I went through, came out the other end, and I said, oh, where's Ravi? Which is the one who'd been telling me. He said, oh, Ravi never comes through. He's never actually ever been through. He's too frightened. And I'd been absorbing all his fear. And it's so easy to absorb other people's fear. So, what do you do to stop absorbing all of this fear coming in? Because it's out. A lot of us look at information and we focus on the words that are written. Start focusing on the energy. And if you start feeling people coming up with how horrible life is and how the world's coming to an end, and cut it out. They're projecting all of the emotions. So in other words, focus on the emotion of the content, the vibration of it, and you'll find what's happening in the world, but find other sources of information that have got a different vibration with it. It's factual rather than people projecting their own fears in the information. And the third top tip, boundaries. Yeah, Reena was hinting before about the boundaries she started to create about people who had a different vibration and moving them out. I remember I had a client come to me once, and he said, I used to be a successful businessman in the Far East. I used to have several companies, and then when I got married, it all stopped. And now I can't go out unless my wife gives me the money to spend, and she wants to know exactly what I'm going to be spending it on. And to get away from it all, I've got a little hut at the bottom of the garden, and I do my painting in there. And we went through and found out the source of this inability to stand up and to say what was important to him. And he was able to say to his wife, I'm sorry, you know, you have to go in your own way. I can't live like this. And she left. And he was over the moon. It was amazing. And then a little while later, his family members came and said, "You've got to accept Mum back. She's pining. She can't cope by herself." It's often what happens when people are very controlling. It's actually hiding a deeper emotional issue underneath it. So she came back and he established what the new boundary would be, about what she would do, wouldn't do, and if she went beyond that boundary, the relationship would come to an end. And all of us need to create a boundary based on the energy that the person has. And sometimes it's not easy, because it can be people who we'd previously think as perhaps family members, or people who we'd previously thought as friends. But there's a vibrational aspect to it, and this is what we would urge you to consider. Focus on the vibration, not on what society would suggest you ought to do or not do. We're trying to move away from that to be souls with the freedom to expand our energies in the way that we want. Oh, and that brings us together. Any questions at all for Reena or myself?
Yeah.
I've got a picture of you both.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but are there
just one. You mentioned about when you die, you have a life review. What is that all about? I mean, why would we have a life review? And then all of a sudden have
It's a little bit like if you're at school, you know, you sit down for your exams, you fill in the paper, you want to have the mark coming back to say how well you did or not. And if you didn't do too well, you probably want to understand, well, what things didn't you do right, so you could fix it the next time you take the exam.
Okay, but what's the end goal? So they send us back again? Will we just keep coming back? I mean,
It's to evolve as souls, quite literally. I mean, we can choose to stay where we are, but I mean, a lot of us in life can either have a particular job or a way of working or existing and just stay there. Or we can embrace something new, bring in some new skill or learn some new hobby or change our life in some meaningful way. It's our choice.
When we look at all the between lives cases, you know, we always have a reason for being here. Some people come for life lessons, some people come from soul missions. And so that review is almost like a review of your performance within that particular life lesson. And so sometimes the life lesson is enormous. You know, when, say, under the umbrella of love, someone can come with no love, someone can come as someone who is perhaps a perpetrator, someone who's quite abusive. That's part of a lesson. And then they can come back as the recipient of an abuse, you know, and that is, again, an experience of not having love as well. And so under this huge umbrella of love, they can go through different elements of it, get their performance, as it were. But with all this knowledge, there is the evolution of the soul. There's the depth of understanding of the big picture of what
choose to stay there?
love is. Pardon?
Can we choose to stay on the other side?
Yeah, some people choose to stay there. Some people just come here for a soul mission. Some people just come here for a mission, one life, and then off they go. So it just depends on your reason for being here.
It's probably just worth adding that the spiritual perception and the human one is different. You know, from a human one, we may think, oh my goodness, why are people having such terrible experiences? You know, for example, like the concentration camp. But from a soul perspective, they could be saying, oh my goodness, if I do that, I can, instead of coming back for 20 lives of learning it slowly, I can just clear it all in one go. And the advice may be, we wouldn't recommend it. And the soul comes down and then, I don't know, halfway up Everest because they've decided to climb Everest and think, why on earth have I decided to have life so difficult? But it's a soul choice. So the soul chooses what sort of life, and we in human form can decide with free will how we respond to it. So everything is free will.
So you mentioned patience, and I actually think that's one of my lessons. I only want to start.
Yeah, I think we could all do with a bit of patience, can't we?
So many things have
Yeah.
happened to me that almost told
Okay.
it's like someone's teaching.
This gentleman, can we, because he asked, and
Oh,
then
yes.
we'll go there, and then somewhere there. Yeah.
Well, just a question really. A lot of people die quite peacefully and happily in their sleep. Do you think it's likely that they have a near-death experience and try to make a total one? I had something like that myself. I found myself in a very light place, so I could have just gone off. And I knew that I had a choice whether I wanted to come back or not. And I was going, and then I thought, oh no, I don't want my girlfriend. Think of her waking up with a dead body next to her.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I thought that was the only reason I bothered going back,
Yeah.
because it was so nice and blissful.
Yeah.
But truly, anybody that studied meditation techniques like Advaita or Vedanta, hundreds of years old, would experience a state of bliss and would have seen that. There's nothing new about it. Also, it's nice to think that we're going into a new golden age. But according to some of the Indian philosophies, we're going into the age of Kali, which is not so great.
No, we're coming out of Kali.
We're coming out of Kali.
We're coming out of Kali into Treta.
Ah, I see. Are
So
you,
it's
you're
still an
certain of that,
ascension,
are you?
yeah. So it's still an ascension, but it's not to the Satya. Does that make sense? But the Indian philosophers say
I'm
we're
not qualified
coming
to
out of
say
it.
whether it makes sense or not. There's a lot of different opinions out there. So I really don't know, but it's curious what you're saying about that. How at different times, different philosophies come to the surface. But it's curious now, though. There's a new temple recently been built, last year opened, first pagan temple built in Greece, in 1,300 years. 1,700 years, sorry, I correct myself, since 300 AD. Paganism is on the rise in Greece. They're activating the temples, building new modern temples. And that's a curious thing to observe.
Could I just pick up on one thing you said at the beginning there about the blissful state that you were
Yes,
in your near-death experience? Which,
yes.
as Reena was talking about, there's a similarity there. What a lot of our work is in terms of moving to the new consciousness is to have this state of bliss in our day-to-day life. You know, now, here, in our physical bodies. That is the opportunity all of us can have. But we have to work at it, and there's a roadmap of getting there. And this is what we were talking about with Reena's analogy of going up the mountain
Yeah.
to the top. The top is where the bliss is.
Yeah.
So rather than wait until we die, why not create the bliss now? And that's something all of us can do, because we've all got within us our resources, which are eternal part, you know, our consciousness. We have to just link to it, clear things that are blocking it, and some of them that we've talked about, and progressively work through them. It's a little bit longer than a near-death experience, but it's certainly not as dramatic or as surprising to the person having it.
But
And
isn't
I
that
was-
what meditation does and has done for hundreds of years?
But this
Simple
is more
meditation
intentional
techniques.
living while we're not in meditative state. It's having that sort of experience cooking. It's having that experience when you're talking to your loved ones. It's having that experience, you know, in that blissful state, just embodying that blissful state in your everyday doing. You know, and it's a lot more difficult. It's easier said than done, as it were. Does that make sense to everyone? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So meditation is one piece of the jigsaw, but there's a lot of other pieces of the jigsaw to bring up the state that Reena said in our day-to-day life. But
Yeah.
it's achievable. We don't have to, if you like, do meditation all day or lock ourselves away in a cave in the mountains. We can do it here with the jobs that we have, but we have to follow our intuition, because all of us are on a different path. But it's raising our consciousness, raising our vibration is the secret to that. And this is the message that we'd like to leave you all with.
Yes,
Lady.
question, yeah? We have
to
Yeah,
add
yeah.
that?
Thank you very much for your we do research between near-death experiences and regression, past regressions. I wanted to ask about the bad experiences, near-death experiences. Did you take them into account?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, in our book, we did interview three people, the two other people, including myself, who have had near-death experiences and between lives, because we wanted to get a more qualitative feel about it. And one of the person that we interviewed had a negative experience with the near-death experience and how it impacted her life. But I have a friend who is a doctor in the U.S., not in the U.S., pardon, in Australia, and she works with terminally ill patients. And one of the patients she had was a guy who met with a really bad motorcycle accident, and he had a very negative near-death experience. But it was about him going to hell and something, but the choice was given: you can either come here, follow this path here, or you can go back and change your life and find a way so that you can go down a different path. So when he came back, and because he was in the hospital, his heart had stopped beating, so they'd measured it all. When he came back, he actually told this to my friend who is a doctor. She's also very Catholic, and they had this long discussion about heaven and hell and sins and things like that. But anyway, he changed his life, when he managed to get out of hospital. So I think a lot of people, when they go through this experience, it is life-changing, negative or positive. So in my case, I just want to find that peace. I just want to be in that peace and freedom as much as I can. Some people do a 180-degree change. But yeah, it does work. It does happen, but in the near-death experience research, I think there's about 15% that have negative experiences. Most of the other people have had positive experiences. So,